Welcome, dear listeners, to the Carolina Hates podcast, brought to you by Wreak Havoc Productions and A Darker World. I'm your host, Dan Sellers. Today, instead of talking about a ghost story, or an unexplained mystery, or another local legend, I'd like to leave you with a riddle. What's a bird, but not a bird? A fish, but not a fish? A dinosaur, but not a dinosaur? A reptile, but not a reptile? Of this earth, yet possibly from another world? The answer, of course, is the enigmatic pterodactyl. Even the very name is misleading. Technically, there's no such thing as a pterodactyl. That's the common name for a class of creatures known as pterodons or pterosaurs, or winged lizards. There were dozens of different types of pterosaurs, and they ranged from as small as 18 inches up to over 35 feet in wingspan. That's bigger than some airplanes. These creatures were much stranger than most people know. To explain what I mean, let's refer back to the riddle. When the first pterosaur was discovered in 1784, the scientists had absolutely no idea what it was. They labeled it as some kind of fish, not because it displayed any aquatic qualities, but simply because the oceans hold some of the Earth's strangest creatures. They felt justified when they found the pterosaur's bones inside plesiosauruses and other seafaring creatures. Based on these assumptions, it would take 60 years for the paleontologist community to accept pterosaurs as flying creatures. And they were, in fact, the earliest known vertebrate to develop powered flight. But while they did fly, they are not considered birds or bats. They're classified as reptiles, even though they share more similarities with birds and reptiles. Their bones were very light and thin like a bird's, and unlike reptiles, they were warm-blooded. And get this, even though they lived between 66 million years ago and 250 million years ago, they are not dinosaurs. Scientifically speaking, they are a completely separate and independent genus of creature that evolved alongside dinosaurs. This, of course, have led some to speculate that pterosaurs may have originated from another planet entirely. Physically, they're shown as a cross between a bat and a heron, blown up to the size of a city bus. But they have slim and meaty bodies, long necks, an extremely elongated head. A membrane of muscle makes up the wing and is attached down each side of the creature, from the wrist down to the torso and all the way down to the ankle. Most pterosaurs have long tails, and some have multicolored head crests. These crests vary greatly even among the same species of pterosaur, and are thought to be some sort of sexual display. Pterosaurs were carnivores and had a very wide range of dietary intake, but they held a great affinity for fish. Their neck and shoulder structure have similarities to today's diving birds like the heron or the gannet, plunging into the water at great speed on top of an unsuspecting school of fish. They could also float on top of the water and use their wings as oars. There's a couple of strangely unique things about the pterosaur anatomy. The pterosaur wasn't covered in feathers like today's birds, nor was it covered in a fur like a gorilla or scales like an alligator, but something in between all three called pycnofibers. Pycnofibers had a hollow central canal. Like a feather, they were a 1/4 inch long, and although they were dense and coarse, They were also flexible, giving the pterosaur a somewhat fuzzy nature. The other unique thing about the pterosaur anatomy is how it breathed. A creature that big expended a lot of energy, and to fuel that energy it needed air. Lots of it. In addition to a normal set of lungs, every available space within its body was filled with air sacs. Even the wings were lined with these sacs. The bones themselves even acted as air pumps to flow air through the sacs. By doing that, it could control the density of the body and the wings. Humans, as well as every other air-breathing creature on Earth, breathes air in and expels carbon dioxide through exhalation. But pterosaurs breathed during both the inhalation and exhalation cycles. Due to this efficient intake and use of air, pterosaurs could reach air speeds of up to 80 miles per hour and cover several hundred miles without needing to land. I've described pterosaurs in a wide variety of shapes and sizes, but if you're like me, you have a particular creature pictured in your head. The creature most often associated with the word pterodactyl, and the one most often seen in books and movies. This species is actually known as the Pteradon. There's a simple reason why the Pteradon has become synonymous with the term pterosaur or pterodactyl. Fossils, any fossils, are rare. Since pterosaur bones are so thin and fragile, only a handful of fossil specimens have been discovered. But the Pteradon was either vastly more prolific than the other species, or it lived in areas where the soil was more conducive to preserving fossils. In any case, paleontologists have found the remains of more than 1,200 different pterodons. It's become the pterosaur mascot. And the best thing is, it's ours. All ours. The Pteradon territory was almost exclusively through the central United States and Canada. As far as pterosaurs go, it was mid-sized. The average size of a male was about 150 pounds and had an 18-foot wingspan. The females were significantly smaller with a 12-foot wingspan. By comparison, the largest pterosaur was found in Mexico and had a 35-foot wingspan. Pterodons stood apart from all other pterosaurs in a couple of ways. First, while almost all pterosaurs had long tails, as long or longer than the body itself. But the Pteradon had an extremely short, stubby tail, a foot long or even less. There's another difference between pterodons and other pterosaurs, and you may have already guessed this if you know Greek. The word pterodon means toothless wing. The pterosaur beak was filled with sharp, pointy teeth, but the pterodon is one of the only two pterosaur species known to not have any teeth at all. Now, as fascinating as pterodons and pterodactyls are, you may be thinking that they don't really belong on this particular podcast, except North Carolina and the surrounding area is considered to be one of the just 3 pterodactyl hotspots in the United States today. Every year, hundreds of people around the world claim to see some kind of pterosaur. In North Carolina alone, there are 50 to 75 annual sightings. So much so that there is more than one website devoted to documenting these sightings. Like Savon from Raleigh, who claims seeing 2 creatures flying side by side. At first, she thought they were geese, and then she thought they must be cranes. But as she got closer, she realized that they were nothing like she had ever seen before. Her account has been echoed dozens of times across Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. These people are 100% sure that what they saw wasn't a heron or a crane or any other large bird. Witnesses described them as prehistoric birds, dinosaur birds, dragons, or of course, the pterodactyl. Many witnesses depict very similar pterosaurs, a giant flying creature with a wingspan between 8 and 12 feet. It's nearly black in color, has an enormous pointed beak, and a boomerang-shaped head crest. Most claim the creature has an extremely long tail with a diamond-shaped bulb at the end. Or as one man said, quote, "It looked like what I had seen in a Jurassic Park movie," end quote. Now, we obviously know that it cannot be a pterodon, but most other pterosaur species did, indeed, have long tails. Professor Zano from the Paleontology Department of the North Carolina Museum of Natural Science told Raleigh's News and Observer that very simply, quote, "Pterosaurs are extinct and have been for 65 million years," end quote. Jonathan Whitcomb operates one of the websites devoted to documenting modern pterosaur sightings. I'm sure if he heard Professor Zano say this, he would remember that those exact words were once said in reference to the coelacanth, which were thought to be extinct for 65 million years, until one was finally caught in a fisherman's net in 1938. In fact, over 100 species of animals that were once believed extinct have been rediscovered, though admittedly none in such spectacular fashion as the coelacanth. Professor Cartmill from the Evolutionary Anthropology Department at Duke University concedes that a living pterosaur wouldn't be impossible, just highly unlikely. He says, quote, "I can't believe that if there were living pterosaurs in North Carolina, 3 centuries of naturalists, explorers, farmers, hunters, trappers, and biologists would never have run across a single specimen, living or dead," end quote. So, the same argument they use against Bigfoot, that he could exist. Professor Cartmill adds, quote, "I'd rank it being slightly more probable than living unicorns in Raleigh and Durham, but only slightly," end quote. However, going back to Cartmill's first statement about why anyone hasn't seen a pterosaur in 300 years, maybe they have. Various Native American tribes all across America held an ancient giant flying creature in great regard, the thunderbird. They depicted it in totems, on pottery, and in rock carvings. If the thunderbird actually existed, and most mythology is usually based on at least partial truth, then it makes sense that it would have been some sort of pterosaur. Furthermore, all through the 1800s and early 1900s, there was talk of an American dragon in the southwest United States, and many of these reports are documented in the newspapers and books of the time. Like the monster of Elizabeth Lake, reported in 1830, Don Pedro Cardillo received a land grant on the lake and built a home for his family. 3 months later, he abandoned the land and the house due to a giant bat-winged creature that he described as being a supernatural being. A posse of men came out to hunt the beast. They caught fleeting glimpses of it and heard a deafening roar that caused even the hardiest among them to take pause. But the nature of the beast eluded them. Sporadic reports of a giant flying reptile would continue in the western United States for the next 100 years. In Tombstone, 2 woodcutters claimed to have seen an 18-foot flying reptile. By now, these creatures were being referred to as American dragons. They took shots at it with a shotgun, but said the pellets rang off its hide like hitting iron. Others had better luck downing the creature. In Whetstone, Arizona, 2 farmers would shoot down an American dragon over the Huachuca Mountains, but when they returned with the equipment to skin the beast, it had disappeared. A pair of the dragons terrorized the Utah Territory, eating chickens and killing the ranchers' horses. Most skeptics believe that these sightings are misidentified herons or cranes, but the witnesses stand behind their claims. Photography equipment became available to the masses by the mid-1850s. If you do an internet search for pterodactyl or thunderbird photos, you'll get about 5 million results that are for thunderbirds or the Thunderbird Aerial Acrobatic Team. But if you weed through those, mixed in among those millions of results will be a couple of dozen photos showing men from the Old West, or the Civil War, or from the turn of the century gathered around a giant winged animal that can only be described as a pterosaur. Now, of course, it's possible the photos are all faked. But what if they aren't? To learn more about this story, check out modernpterosaur.com, newsandobserver.com, and Strange Magazine, issue number 21. This show was researched and written by Jeffrey Cochran and was produced and hosted by me, Dan Sellers. You can find everything Jeff's up to at adarkerworld.com, and you can find everything that we're up to at recoverproductions.com. You can find the Carolina Haynes podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and YouTube, or directly from the feed at carolinahaynes.libsyn.com. You can learn more about this show and the upcoming Carolina Haynes book at our website, carolinahaynes.com. Don't forget to like our official Facebook page at facebook.com/carolinahaynes. You can follow us on Instagram at Recover Productions, and I'm on Twitter at Hayne vs. the Undead. And as always, you can reach me directly at recoverproductions@gmail.com. I love hearing from listeners of the show, so let's keep the feedback coming. We'll be back in 2 weeks with a new episode. Tune in then to hear more about the things that go bump in the night.